As Roger said, my presentation this afternoon is really to talk about practically how big data is impacting, and in particular on market research, but specifically about how it's impacting on media planning. And I thought it was very interesting, Maeve's paper, those that saw it this morning, I think she had some very wise words about making sure that the consumer is at the centre of what we do. And as a market research business, when we're talking about big data, it's absolutely essential for us that we rely on consumers and their goodwill to participate in traditional survey research. I also know that as the first slot after lunch is commonly known as the graveyard slot, so you've got to try and wake people up, so let's talk about sex. And I thought that this was quite an interesting comment that I picked up on Twitter from Dan Airley. And it was talking about big data is like teenage sex. Everybody talks about it, nobody really knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims that they're doing it. And I thought what we'd try and do is talk a little bit about this in practice. So I'll talk for a second about what it is. I think a lot of people know what big data is, but just to remind you. Also to talk about how it's impacting on media planning, some of the limitations of big data, and then wrap up with a couple of conclusions. So what's big data? Again, you can find thousands and thousands of different pieces of data here which will demonstrate how much data is now being thrown off, often as a byproduct of people's interaction with the internet, whether that be through media, whether that be through retail, whether that be through store cards as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily all coming through the online component. And so this one just picks up on the dynamic change that we've seen over the last 10 years in this kind of data. 2003 we created 5 exabytes, which is a lot of data, and now we do that every single day. That was per year and now per day. And I think a lot of us are often being sold this dream at the moment that you can have one piece or one information stream or multiple information streams that all come together to give you this wonderful, all singing, all dancing capability where you can link together all the different touch points that you have with the consumer, whether in terms of their purchase, and link it to all of the different touch points that you have when you want to communicate with those people. And at the moment, I still think that is a little bit of a dream, but there are one or two areas where it's beginning to become a reality. And just thinking generally, I mean, again, you see some quite interesting data like this. This is 2 disparate data sets being pulled together, and this is an example of fast data. If you need to know what's happening with auto sales, then this fear index, this is US data, this fear index is quite a good way of actually predicting what's going to happen with auto sales. So you get an early read on what's happening with auto sales. So it can be useful, it can be very practical. But how are we using it in terms of media planning? I mean, we measure television in over 30 markets around the world, and most markets that we work in, we use what's known as the people meter. Most people in the room are familiar with the people meter. It's been around for over 30 years. It's a box that sits on top of the television set, and then you have a handset that tells you that the person is watching the set. We don't see that changing. I don't think we see that necessarily ever going away. Maybe one day, but not in the near future. But what we do see are new data sets coming in to enhance that measurement. And it's what we call RPD, or return path data, using the return path, in this case, from the set-top box, to enhance the information that we collect from the traditional people meter panels. As well as giving us benefits like passivity, because we can collect the data without a respondent having to participate in the interaction. It also has a host of other potential benefits. It also gives us potentially a head start on cross-platform measurement, because whilst we can actually track down what device, in many cases, people were using to consume the content. It also gives us very rich data as well that we can then enhance with other data sets. So data integration becomes a very real possibility in this context, which is somewhat limited in the context of the people meter service. So this is a piece of work, this is a case study that we worked on, and this is actually taking data from direct TV. So this is direct TV data from the United States. We run a panel, an opt-in panel of 100,000 direct TV homes. And then what we've done is to match that with the scorecard records of about 50 million households across the United States. And what it gives us, obviously, is at a household level, interaction between whether that household was exposed to a commercial and indeed whether they then went on and consumed, or whether the ad actually hit the right target. And this is a piece of work that we do for Direct in order to allow them to give a guarantee to advertisers. So we, in this case, are playing the referee for Direct TV and looking at a linear campaign and an addressable campaign. So the key thing here is to focus on what this rather cryptic H's with WCMs, which is households with weight-conscious mothers. So this was actually a cereal brand. It was a cereal brand targeting weight-conscious mothers. And I think it's quite interesting here to see what happened in terms of the linear campaign versus the addressable campaign. And then you can see there, really from the linear campaign, something like 62%, if you benchmark it against the addressable campaign, of those impacts were actually against the wrong target audience, or outside the target audience. So you can see a potentially substantial lift in terms of what we're able to do in terms of addressing ads to the right households. There is type on this chart, that should say online behavioural data. But it's, again, our world is changing. We're moving from being a market research company where traditionally we go out and we ask people lots of questions, and then we run it through a computer, and then we provide tables or software solutions and feed data back. Increasingly what we're doing now is integrating that with behavioural data. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of how we're working with behavioural data. And this is an example that we've launched. This is a service we've just launched in the UK. So TGI is a large survey. It's been around a long time in over 70 markets around the world. And we collect information about people's broad-based behavioural activities in terms of what they do in terms of media, what products and brands they buy, their attitudes. It's a very broad-based, survey-based solution. And what we've done in a number of those households is to add technology. So we've added a software meter to those households in order to capture, again, passively, what information, what sites they've been to, where they've been browsing across the web. And we've then linked that information and modelled it back across the whole of that TGI population. And it means that you can start, if you're going to do a more traditional media plan, if there could be such a thing as a traditional media plan in online, but if you are going to actively plan, as opposed to go down a programmatic route, you could actually pick off an audience of people who are light TV viewers, and in this case, users of low-fat yogurts. So I can tell you, where you're more likely to find those people. I can show the sites where you're more likely to find those people. Now, that's potentially quite interesting, isn't it? But we've got predictive behavioural targeting. We know that if somebody's gone to a car website, then they're more likely to be interested in cars, and we might serve them a car ad. The difficulty comes, and of course this is the challenge broadly across the online industry, is how do we target people in packaged goods? How do we, when we want to sell display ads on the web, how do we find people who are in that target audience? We believe that this is certainly one of the ways in which we can begin to try and do that. The second way, and this is a bit of a sneak preview, in effect you're the first people to hear this publicly, that we are launching a service with one of our sister companies called iBehaviour. This is in the UK only to begin with, but we'll expand internationally if it's successful. And what we're doing here is to take the TGI information and then to match that information against iBehaviour's cookie pool. What we're then able to do is to find people who are common to both data sets, and then from that we find lookalikes within that cookie pool, and we're able to target those people in terms of their advertising based off the information that we've got from TGI. Now, being a market research company, the other thing that we will do is also then to remove those TGI respondents from that final data set that is then targeted in order to stay within privacy and MRS, or Market Research Society professional conduct and codes of conduct. So we think this is a very interesting area. So we're trying to tackle it one end from, if you like, the broader planning perspective, and then we're also coming at it perhaps from the other end by looking at it from a programmatic standpoint. And iBehaviour is the first company that we're working with in this space, but I don't expect it to be the last, and we're very open-minded as to how we move forward in that particular area. Again, there are lots. We increasingly are requested by our clients and other third parties to start putting our data into a lot of these tools, big dashboards, integrated tools. They often look a bit like that. So this is one from one of the agency groups, and this is pulling in data from about 15 different sources, including our own. And again, they're interesting tools, and it provides a lot of information. You can look at things side by side, and that's great in a way. And in some cases, you can begin to see causality or inferences across the data. The challenge from my perspective is that all the data is flat, in the sense that all the data is treated equally. It doesn't matter what the data is, it's all given equal weight in that display. No account is taken of the fact that this data may be nationally representative of the whole population, whereas this data here is really just the returns that we got from an online direct response campaign. So they're quite different. And I think if I had a general concern, that would be one of the concerns within, as we go forward into these new areas. I think it's really important that we recognise the relative value of the different data sources that sit behind some of these screens. I think that is one of the limitations of big data, and there are others. I mean, again, I showed you a good example of general data being linked together. This was another example that somebody showed me recently, which was taking data from Foursquare, which gave the impression of this able to produce a fantastic map of how people travelled around Thanksgiving. But in practice, we know that you would think from this that the whole of the US was on a plane during Thanksgiving. The fact of the matter is 90% of those journeys actually are made by car. And so it can be really quite misleading to go down some of these routes. I think the other thing, again, that we think is really important around behavioural data and big data, yes, there is a huge amount of it. It's enormous, and in theory, you can do an awful lot with that data. What the problem with big data, what it typically will not do, is tell you why somebody is doing what they're doing. So again, you know, we hear lots of scare stories about why we should all pack up now in the market research industry and all go home because it can all be dealt with by behavioural data. The fact of the matter is that big data very rarely addresses the why question. And again, I use this simply to raise the point. Again, we can build potentially quite interesting target audiences based off people's attitudes. This is one we recently created looking at chocolate archetypes. And so these people are in these different groups based on their attitude. Now, using the devices I've just shown you, we can then pick up those target audiences and start to try and address those attitudinal groups over the web. So I think we're at a very interesting time at the moment as we begin to realise how traditional data collection can be linked to behavioural solutions in a much more interesting way. So, in conclusion, I think, first of all, I think big data will inevitably change the way that media is researched, planned, bought and sold. It's already happening. We're already in a number of places being asked whether we can integrate set-top box data. And in fact, in the United States, we do integrate the set-top box data that we produce with Nielsen's People Meter service. So it's already becoming part of the local measurement currency for television in the United States. It's already beginning to make changes. You know, without doubt, media owners, mobile carriers, online retailers and others are capturing data as a byproduct of the way that they interact with consumers, allowing the potential for a much more rounded picture of the consumer with information collected passively, which is very interesting. It can provide much greater granularity, so we can start drilling down into relatively small target audiences at relatively small levels of geography. It can also be quicker as well. You know, again, surveys take time, and often by the time somebody's completed a survey, processed it, published the results, the events have come in and gone and the opportunity has been lost. So again, speed is another benefit of big data. And I've put potentially lower cost. I think it can be lower cost. I don't think it always is. And I think anybody who is from one of the market research businesses, and I know there's not a lot in the room, who's spoken recently to some of the mobile companies. Some of the mobile companies have really become very aggressive in the way that they are marketing the transactional information and behavioural information that they have back to the market research companies, thinking that we will have several $1 million just sitting in a pot. Oh, I've gone blank. Several $1 million in a pot just waiting for applications for mobile data. So I think, yeah, potentially it is lower cost, but I do think very rapidly people who are producing big data have worked out that it does have value, and in some cases, perhaps, I'm not saying that always, but in some cases are really aggressively valuing that data. I think that there are a lot of things that have to change around big data. I think big data is an opportunity, but I think a lot of things have to change. I think we have to change the ecosystem. I mean, in the market research world, particularly if you work in Western Europe, we're used to working in what we call a joint industry model, where we have buyers and sellers coming together to produce the media currency. And it's very, very difficult if you then say, right, we're going to pull in this set-top box data from one of the potential players in the ecosystem, and we're going to integrate that and plug that into the people meter data, and everybody will benefit. Naturally, there's going to be concern and skepticism around that, and I think it's going to take time for the industry to recognise the value of that and to overcome perhaps some of the historic concerns that they might have had around that. So I think there's a lot of things need to fall into place. I think the other thing I hope that if you take one thing away from my presentation this afternoon, is that a lot of the traditional rules still apply. It may be big data. It's great. I've got this really high quality representative sample data here. Oh, and over here I've got some third-party cookie data and I treat them all the same. That's not necessarily the case. They do not necessarily have the same value. Often the data is not representative. And often again, with particularly online data and behavioural data, you have great visibility over your own domain, over your customers. What you can't see is what they're doing elsewhere. I remember many years ago when Google really aggressively started launching Google Analytics. We were told all of our online businesses as market research companies would be closed within weeks as Google completely took over that space. I can tell you now that Google is my biggest client, comfortably my biggest client. And why are they our client? Because what we're able to do is to give them insight as to what happens outside what they see within their own domain, and to put that in context. And that really helps them in terms of their business and generating revenue. I think there's also a slight concern that we end up commoditizing data. I touched upon that earlier on, that all data is not the same, and we plug it into these machines and everything looks the same to the untrained eye. And I think just picking up what Maeve said this morning, and privacy is something we cannot take too seriously. Within our own organisation, we've hired a full-time Chief Privacy Officer who works across our business in order to make sure that we're staying well within the confines of legality, but also to Maeve's point this morning, also recognising that the consumer is very, very important to us in the research process still. So, conclusion, I think big data is a very promising area, and it's creating new approaches to buying and selling media in more creative and more connected ways. It should lead to better targeting. I think I showed you an example of how we can do that. I showed you an example of also how it can enhance return on investment measurement. But I think also as an industry, we have to manage this process carefully and professionally. And I think there will be a change as we go through the next couple of years, as this whole area becomes more professionalised and there are more rules and common approaches to doing this. Or back to Twitter again, and this was another tweet from under the original one. I think big data without clear thinking is like doing it without protection. Thank you very much.